Thank you very much. In exclusive interviews with this programme, two former Chelsea youth footballers have called for personal apologies from the club after they claimed they were subjected to racist abuse there in the 90s. One has told us how, as a 12-year-old schoolboy, he was the victim of such abuse by former Chelsea assistant manager Gwyn Williams. The ex-players are speaking for the first time since the club published a Bernardo's report into racism at the club during the 80s and 90s, back in August. The two players didn't contribute to that report because they say, as it was paid for by Chelsea, they had worries about its independence. Talking anonymously to our reporter Jim Reid, they say the club didn't go far enough in reacting to that report and they want a face-to-face apology. To let you know, Jim's film has some really strong and offensive racist language from the start. We've included it because we believe it's important to accurately reflect the language these players say they were subjected to. The former players are portrayed by actors in this film, which lasts just under 7 minutes.
Football was just natural to me. So for me to come to a football club and to do something that I love and to experience racism was mad.
It was feral. The club was feral. No other club was like it.
An investigation called it a dog-eat-dog world where bullying was widespread. Former Academy director Gwyn Williams was described last month as the instigator of racial abuse at Chelsea. A report for the club by the charity Bernardo's found young black players were subjected to abhorrent racial abuse on a regular basis in the 1980s and 90s. That investigation was triggered after former youth team players launched legal claims against the club in 2017. Two of those players have now given interviews for the first time. They want to remain anonymous, so their words are being read by young actors. A warning, some of the language you're about to hear is racist and incredibly offensive.
I remember the first time I met him. He said, "Here's your £3, you little coon." He said how big my lips were, how big my nose was. That was my first encounter. I was 12. I was shocked and I was like, I didn't know how to react. I mean, who would at that age?
For me, it was coon, nignog, black bastard. I didn't even know all those words. And for the people running the club to be instigating racism, like it was cool to say those sort of things, that was crazy to me.
The Chelsea sides of the 1980s and 90s featured talented black players. At senior level, there's no suggestion of abuse, but young players say their experience was a very different one. The youngest trained here in Battersea Park in South London on a Thursday evening.
I was coming in scared to make a mistake. Even on the pitch, it affected me because I couldn't relax. I was thinking if I have a bad game, I'd come in and everybody would be walking around saying, "You black this," or "You black that." I didn't enjoy my football. I was in fear of everything.
It just escalated and got worse. It was like, "Have you been robbing old grannies? Did you go to school today?" "Yeah, I did." "Oh, that's a rarity." It was just a barrage of racism, you know.
Gwyn Williams joined Chelsea in 1979 as a youth development officer and rose up to assistant manager before leaving the club in 2006. His lawyer wrote to Chelsea denying any and all allegations of racism. He claimed the extracts of the report shown to him were biased, untrue, unfair and artificial. But the investigation team heard substantial evidence of a toxic, racist environment that had long-lasting effects on the players involved.
This was relentless. This was daily. And when it's happening to you every day, it strips you of all your self-worth and confidence, even to the point where I had suicidal thoughts in my teens.
I was in a bad way at 17, going out, trying drink, trying drugs, which I never did before. It got to the point where I didn't want to talk about football. I just didn't want to know about football.
The report also looked into allegations against another coach at the club, former England international Graham Rix. It found while he could be aggressive and bullying, the authors did not see evidence of racism. The two players we've spoken to decided not to take part in the review as it was paid for by Chelsea and they had worries about its independence. But as teenagers, they're both sure they saw Graham Rix use racist language.
He came out with his coffee and he said, did you go out this weekend? I said, yeah, I did. He said, oh, did you shag any of our white girls? And I just thought, I have had enough of this. So I said, yeah, I did. And he went quiet. And I could see his face go a little red. And he said, if that was my daughter, I'd lynch you. And I said, well, maybe one day it might be. But I wanted to kill him.
Graham Rix's lawyer gave a statement to the Review denying he was bullying, aggressive or racist. He pointed out that many parties who gave evidence did not recall him saying anything which was racially abusive. Both former players we've spoken to said they felt it was impossible to report the abuse at the time. The club had no safeguarding policy in place. There was no other official to turn to.
I didn't say nothing to my parents because I didn't want to stop my football dream. I knew the minute I said anything, my dad would go down and it'd be a problem sort of thing. Yeah, so it was hard.
I mean, who were you going to talk to? There was nothing in place.
The investigation last month concluded there was substantial evidence of racist abuse by Williams. The two players we've spoken to talk about how their lives were deeply affected and how their careers could have been very different at another club.
It took me to some dark places. I have to take medication at times. I've been depressed, withdrawn.
I couldn't come to terms with what happened. To be honest, I still feel angry. I still feel huge amounts of anger.
They said all these pretty little things to our parents, and as soon as we got into it, it was just like living in a nightmare. Well, it's as simple as that as far as I'm concerned, because they've changed us as young adults growing up.
In 2006, Gwyn Williams left Chelsea and joined Leeds. He was sacked after sending explicit photos to the club receptionist. Graham Rix was jailed in 1999 for having sex with a 15-year-old girl. He was reinstated by Chelsea after his release from prison and was the first team coach when the team won the FA Cup that year. He went on to manage a number of clubs, including Portsmouth and Hearts. Chelsea has now apologised to those who suffered what it describes as the deeply shocking behaviour by Gwyn Williams found by the investigation. The men we've spoken to say the club needs to go much further. They're accusing it of trying to cover up the scandal by publishing the findings on the same day as a second report into sexual abuse by another individual at the club decades earlier. They now want a full face-to-face apology from Chelsea, and they want people higher up at the club at the time to admit they let young players down.
And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. I've got some statements to read as well, but I just want to bring you this breaking news. In the last few minutes, a Scottish court has ruled that Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament is illegal. Scottish lawmakers say all three judges in Scotland's highest court of appeal have ruled that the suspension of Parliament, the prorogation, is unlawful. I mean, potentially there'll be an appeal to the highest court in the land, which is the Supreme Court, and that could be on Tuesday. But that breaking news, dramatic news, given that two previous court cases have suggested that Boris Johnson's suspension is not unlawful. This today, a Scottish court ruling that Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament is illegal. All three judges in Scotland's highest court of appeal say that the closure of Parliament is unlawful. Absolutely dramatic news in the last few minutes. Of course, we'll talk to our correspondent, who's, I'm told, just making her way out of the court right now. We'll talk to Lorna Gordon as soon as she is ready to talk to you, and we'll bring you lots of reaction, as you would expect, during the programme this morning. What does that mean in practical terms? Your reaction, very welcome. Victoria at bbc.co.uk. And you can send us a message on Twitter as well. Use the hashtag VictoriaLive. Right, let's go back to our top story today. I want to tell you that both Gwyn Williams and Graham Rix maintain their denials of any wrongdoing. Mr Rix's lawyer points out that both the FA and the Disclosure and Barring Service have looked into the allegations, and there are no restrictions in place on his client. Chelsea have reissued the statement they released at the time of the Bernardo's report. As a club, we want to apologise to all players who experienced this deeply shocking behaviour. We're doing and will continue to do everything we can to ensure that those boys, girls, men and women who play for this club, and indeed anyone who works for and with the club, will never have to endure the terrible experiences which these young players suffered. Let's talk now to Mickey Ambrose, 58-year-old former player and football scout, played for Chelsea during the 80s, and Sean Wharton, former player and manager, who was at Sunderland in the youth setup during the late 80s and has coached in Wales. He now works for Show Racism, The Red Card, giving talks and classes on anti-discrimination. Welcome, both of you. I wonder, for our younger viewers, and the many of them, if you could tell them what it was like in the late 80s, in the mid to late 80s, when you were a player in terms of racist abuse.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, at a young age back then, you wanted to be a professional footballer. Women's football is the fastest growing sport, and the girls are now doing fantastically well. As a young boy, I wrote to Chelsea when I was 8, and I got a letter back saying, unfortunately, you couldn't have a trial, but thank you very much. And I saw the logo, I thought, wow. And that took my breath away. So as a young kid, you wanted to be a footballer. You would not do anything, but you wanted to get a trial for Chelsea or any other club that you liked. And for me personally, being brought up in the East End, in Poplar, my mother came over from Dominica, that was one of my dreams. I had 2 football dads, Ray Wilkins and Pele. And for me, I just wanted to be a footballer. What we endured, and unfortunately what we are still seeing now, is come back again for some strange reason. Society just doesn't understand what the hell ethnic minority people go through. And in particular with football, we've seen about the social media now, but back then you were called things, you were told this, you were did this.
Was it on a par with what the 2 young ex-players have told us today?
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely, no doubt about it. I'm not here to smooth over anybody. I'm telling you now that those situations, in my experience of seeing it and what I was called or whatever, did happen.
Right. And let me bring you in, if I may, Sean, in terms of your own experience. How do you think it compares to Britain in 2019?
I think I have to resonate with everything that's been said so far. I had similar experiences, and I'm sure that there's lots of players of BAME who would have experienced very similar things across the UK, wanting to be professional footballers. You had lots of battles. You had a battle of wanting to be the best you could possibly be. You had the battle of joining football clubs. You had a battle of being with a coach and trying to impress a coach. You had a battle of trying to get into the first team, and then you had a battle of experiencing racism against potentially your own fans and other fans. So it was extremely difficult for all players within the 80s and the 90s, So I'm not surprised by the story, and it takes great confidence for the lads to speak up as they have.
How did you deal with it, Mickey, at the time?
I think my late mother, taught me a lot about racism. And I remember a quick story when I was crossing the road with my late brother, age of 5, going to a primary school, and a car went past and called me a black so-and-so. The teacher didn't know how to explain that. She said, speak to your mother. So my mother brought me up in a way with good morals and ethnicity. And for me, I just took it. When you're in a position...
But what did your mum say to you? Say, like, you've got to take it, or...?
Well, she just said to me, child, this is a West Indian accent, child, just ignore it.
Brush it off.
Brush it off, ignore it. When you're trying to make a name for yourself and trying to impress coaches, you let your football do the talking on the pitch.
Sure.
But yes, coming off the pitch or going into training, when comments are made, and if you think bullying somebody is the best way to get the best out of somebody, then you're going down the wrong road. But if you're using racial tones, that's even worse, and so on.
Sean, is that the advice now? Brush it off, or should it be called out?
I think again it takes confidence. Everybody's different. You have to appreciate, regardless of your skin colour, nationality, culture, or religion, you have different personalities. You need to be a confident person to stand up against racism. It's everybody's responsibility, including yours, Victoria, and everybody that's within society. It's not good enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racist. And to put that pressure on one person as an individual is wrong. The advice I would say to young people is speak to somebody who is close to you. Sometimes you have to choose your battles to fight another day, and that was the case for myself. I was fighting nearly every week when I was a young apprentice, because you have to evidence that you cannot accept this behaviour. In order to do that, you have to fight, you have to battle.
Finally, Mickey, I mean, in recent months, Chelsea have been really strong when it comes to anti-racism, whether it's against black players, whether it's about Jewish supporters. I mean, they really have. They've called it out. They've called the fans who engage in that morons, effectively.
Yeah.
Are they an example of how clubs should be dealing with it in Britain in 2019?
Definitely. Chelsea, if I can say that, are, what I believe, showing the way of how to deal and, not say manage the situation, but deal with it. I know the owner, Mr. Abramovich, actually took some fans who were chanting anti-Semitic chants and were say charged, but were doing that. And I know he took them to Auschwitz, you know, to maybe educate them. There are different ways Chelsea are dealing with it. As a club, they cannot afford, their brand and other clubs' brands around the world cannot afford to be obviously putting up with this. So they are dealing with it in the best way they can, and by banning, whether it's a life ban, we saw the incident with Raheem Sterling recently, you know, at Chelsea. So they are dealing with it, and I think the club is sort of showing the way to other clubs. It's
because
down
it's
now,
calling out and it's educating.
It's definitely,
Okay.
and it's down to the Premier League and the FA to all come together. You know, there's a lot of money in football. You know, why can't they sort this out? And I think Chelsea are doing a magnificent job now in dealing with it. I don't know what happened back then, but the new hierarchy, so to speak, are leading the way.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Mickey Ambrose, thanks for coming on the programme. Sean Wharton, many thanks for your time as well. We appreciate it.